The effectiveness of research interview to a large extent depends on the effectiveness and usefulness of the questions that are included in the research interviews or that are included in the interview protocols. In this brief presentation, I would like to discuss the kind of questions, interview questions that might be considered effective and useful in terms of collecting data that is relevant and useful for our research studies. So there are certain characteristics of such effective interview questions that I'll briefly share with you in this presentation. The first characteristics of such research of questions that make these questions effective research interview questions is relevance. And it is quite obvious that the interview questions should be relevant. And what actually relevance means? Well, relevance actually means that the questions that we ask actually are relevant in terms of collecting data that is useful for exploring our research questions or for responding to our research objectives. So an interview question will be relevant if it helps in collecting data that is relevant to the research objectives, to the research topic, and to the research question. On the contrary, research interview questions, they do not help us in getting relevant data, will be considered as irrelevant. So the first characteristic of an effective interview question is that it should be relevant to the research topic, to the research objectives, and to the research questions. The second, in many cases I have seen that researchers, especially junior student researchers, have included interview questions in the interview schedule that were not very useful in collecting data that was relevant to the research topic. This is extremely difficult when you collect data and later on you come to know that the data is not very relevant. So ensuring that the interview questions are relevant in the very beginning or before you actually conduct the interviews is very important. To make relevant interview questions, it is important that interview schedules and the questions inside interview schedules are peer reviewed. And also pilot study might help in making interview questions more relevant. The second one is distinction. And distinction actually means that the interview questions are distinct, they are not overlapping, and so you are not repeating the same questions in maybe slightly different words or something. So each interview question is distinct and is actually bringing in data that is distinct and that is relevant to our objectives, and the data that is coming in is not overlapping or repeating. The third important characteristic of effective interview questions is clarity, which is actually that the interview questions are clear both in terms of language and structure. So the language should be clear, it should not be very difficult, it should not be very complex. plus the structure of the questions is actually clear. And again, this mean that in terms of structuring the interview questions, we need to use grammatically correct, clear, and precise language. The fourth one is that interview questions should be jargon free. And this means that the interview questions, the words, the vocabulary that we use in the interview questions is not full of research jargon. In many cases, you might be collecting data from respondents who are not experts in the field, who are just the common practitioners that you want to collect data from, and they might not understand the jargon that comes in academic language or in research language. So generally, interviews should have questions that are jargon free. Then the next important characteristic of effective interviews is that interview questions should be exploratory, or in other words, they should be open. And so there are generally two types of questions that one can ask: confirmatory questions, which generally are responded to in terms of yes no answers, or agree disagree answers, and exploratory questions that actually help in making the respondents respond in more detailed and with open type of answers. So because interviews are generally conducted in qualitative research studies, it is therefore important that exploratory open-ended questions are asked so that we get rich and detailed data. The next important thing is that interview questions should be thought-provoking. And so, because generally we are interested in qualitative interview-based researches, we are interested in the detailed perceptions and thinking and ideas of the respondents. So the nature of the questions should be such that it helps the respondents in getting into deeper thinking and reflection related to the issue. And so instead of what, where, and when questions, the why question and the how questions are questions that that will lead to more thinking on the part of the respondents. And so interview questions should be thought-provoking. Then number 7 is having one idea. Generally, interview questions that ask for one idea at a time, that are based on one idea, or that are actually asking questions related to one aspect of an issue, are more effective because these help the respondent in giving complete thinking, full thinking to one particular idea, and so they do not get confused in thinking about and responding to more than one ideas or more than one questions in a single question. So generally it's a single question, but if you combine 2 or more questions in one interview question, that is something that is not very useful. And so interview questions having one idea, asking about one aspect of something at a time, will be considered as good interview question. The next important characteristic of interview questions is that the questions should be according to the respondent's capacity. So I have seen that in some cases, let's say in the educational context, respondents are asking certain things from students that they should actually ask from teachers. And in some cases, they're asking things from teachers that they should be asking from students. And so it is very important for an effective research interview question that the question is asked from the person who is the relevant person, and then answering to that particular question is actually in the capacity or according to the knowledge or level of the respondent. So this is something that is very important. Sometimes asking questions that is beyond the capacity or the knowledge of the respondents will get you data that will not be very authentic and very useful. And the last one in this list, of course the list goes beyond this, but these I consider is the most important characteristics. So in this list, the last one is that the interview questions should be logically organized. And this actually means that if in a research, generally in a research study, we have objectives, more than one objectives or more than one research questions, and those objectives and research questions are based on the ideas that we want to explore in the particular research study. So in line with those objectives, we need to organize our interview questions as well. So generally our interview questions should begin with interview questions related to objective 1, and then to objective 2, and then to objective 3, and so on. And similarly, generally they should also be organized, logically organized, in terms of the easier questions coming first, and then the questions that require more in-depth thinking later on. And so this is also a sort of logical organizations. So there should be logical organization in the interview questions as well. So this is a brief overview of the main characteristics of effective research interview questions. Thank you very much for your time. Take care.